glad you could make it to this WBA webinar with our esteemed members and partners. So we are super excited about this topic. I think the momentum building into this session has been tremendous. Coming out of Dallas, I think this becomes more and more an industry topic for this year and beyond. And really today we want to talk to you about from emergency connectivity to operational reality. So we are working on this framework for a couple of years now from the WBA standpoint. We believe collaboration is fundamental towards the success of new technologies that we need basically to scale in the industry. And that's why we believe that this converged cellular plus Wi-Fi for mission critical environments is ever more important. So for today's agenda, we prepared a set of moments here where you can also interact with our panelists, speakers, and participation is very encouraged during this session. So you have a chat where you can put your questions. We'll try to address them as we go along. But first of all, just to introduce myself, I'm Bruno Tomás. I work as the CTO for the WBA, and I've had the pleasure of working with a vast set of members that try to build this framework, and we'll have an opportunity to deep dive on that, on the main outcomes and where we are planning to go next. So first, we'll have an analyst perspective. So we invited Ken Reben from Critcom's Insights. Ken has been kind enough to help the WBA here navigate through what I can call a vertical of emergency services and mission critical, and is going to challenge here some of our speakers today on what he sees from his industry standpoint and lead into the discussion. Next, we will have Mark Grayson, which is one of our key work group chairs involved across many WBA activities, but providing you a more deeper perspective on the take WBA is doing for instance, calling over cellular and Wi-Fi, and also the concept of public warning systems. Then we'll have quite a vast year roundtable. So there are many profiles. So we invited vendors that have real world solutions, hardware, but also those working over the top to make this a reality inside buildings. And then some of our industry partners from the ecosystem, such as Safer Buildings Coalition. We have APCO International, TCCA, and work group share of one of the key groups here for our engagement. So hopefully we provide you some insights, something you can bring back to your companies. But definitely we hope that this is a motivation and some energy you can get from our speakers to get involved. So with no further ado, I would like now to hand over to Ken, that is going to show here some interesting data points. So Ken, over to you.
Thank you, Bruno. Appreciate you, the WBA, making time for this vital topic. I'm Ken Rabin. I'm an industry analyst tracking the evolution of communications for the public safety community. And the topic of coverage indoors is one of the most vital topics that need to be addressed by governments as well as industry. As an industry analyst, I look at technology. In parallel, however, I've been active in the emergency service as a volunteer responder for my entire career. I still operate in the Washington, D.C. area, and I am impacted when I go on duty and respond by the issues that we are talking about and the solutions we are talking about in this webinar today. So I will share some observations, with the magic of Zoom. We'll talk about the specific topic of assuring communications inside building structures. And what I'd like you to think about is that there are two phases. One phase before the alarm is raised. So a citizen detects an emergency. They may issue a call for help to the authorities. The call for help may go over a fixed line in a building or an office, or it may go over a mobile phone. We then cross that threshold. The emergency services receive the alert in a dispatch center. Resources are identified, they are dispatched, and then they arrive on the scene. When the resources arrive from the law enforcement organization, emergency medical, or the fire service, frequently there are multiple people involved and they must communicate with each other. They may not be together. They may be teams separated and needing to be synchronized using radios, possibly using broadband mechanisms for command and control. And the dispatch center that sent them there needs to be aware of what's going on. So there's a link back to the dispatch center. The vast majority of our incidents are indoor. The calls are coming from homes, offices, places of business, large assemblies such as convention centers, hotels, airports, schools. And most of these notifications coming in are on mobile devices. Unfortunately, in this phase, not all users that need to report a problem can get through. The reasons for this are many. The Safer Buildings Coalition, who we'll hear from later, has worked hard to try to address this gap. In particular, new building construction is very energy efficient, and that characteristic, unfortunately, also has the effect of bouncing radio waves from the outside away from the structure, meaning that some of the users may not have mobile coverage once they're inside a building that is very energy efficient. In addition, mobile operators, they may not strive to cover all portions of a large building. They will focus where the public is, not necessarily the remote aspects of a car park or the utility components of a building. In addition, especially here in the United States, we may have structures like schools that are out in remote regions without much cellular coverage. And this can be a real problem when a crisis arises and there's a need to call for help. Well, let's look at the other side. The responders arrive. They face issues as well. It's the same issues that we face, the calling party may face, but of course we have radios, and our radios, they share some of the same challenges. Old structures that are large may not have penetration of the radios everywhere in the building. And we can solve this problem with solutions such as bidirectional amplifier systems that get installed into buildings. However, these are expensive processes, and generally only new buildings get this advanced capability, meaning there are many buildings that we operate in where we do not have communications back to our dispatch center. We do not have, if we're on a trunked radio system, such as a Tetra system in Europe or a P25 system in the US, we may not have connectivity to our network, and the messages may not be repeated to our colleagues that are on the scene. So here's an example. Last Friday, I was working, taking a shift. So I had my colleagues go to an area where we have a regular problem with communications. And I asked my colleagues, show us what it looks like if you're operating inside a building and you cannot get out. Now go and try to transmit.
I'll try to transmit.
You heard the tone. You see the alarm on the handset. We cannot reach our network. What this means is that a call for help, if the firefighter is trapped, goes nowhere. The orange button there, which is a signal of emergency, the information from that button goes nowhere. We are isolated. Now, in the fire service, we have solutions for this. We will rotate that knob that you see. we'll rotate it to a position on the radio where we go into a talk around mode, which means that we exit the sophisticated network supporting us and we'll talk directly to other firefighters that are near us. Unfortunately, our dispatchers now lose awareness of what we're doing, and metadata that is issued by the radio identifying who we are or if we're in emergency is not available because we are just going to the local users in our area. This is not a problem just for firefighters. In the Washington, D.C. area, several years ago, there was a police-involved shooting in an apartment building. After the officers had taken action, they needed assistance because they had a very unstable scene. When they went to call for assistance, the call for assistance did not go through the Washington, D.C. radio system. And instead, the police officers turned to residents that were in the apartment and asked them, please dial 911 and tell them there's an officer in trouble. There are safety issues that must be addressed, both for the calling public as well as the responders. Wi-Fi is a very interesting option. Wi-Fi is not perfect. It is unlicensed spectrum. It can be interfered with. However, Wi-Fi in the enterprise is ubiquitous, and it presents very interesting and I believe important opportunities. The FCC CISRIC Council, number 8, investigated this topic in 2023, and the report is the basis of very interesting industry work that is pushed forward. The colleagues on the webinar today will go into some more detail about steps the industry has taken. We have an imperative. We need to assure public safety communications for our citizens, as well as for the people who come to help them. Action is required, not only in the industrial segment, the innovators of technology, but also the government network operators that provide the networks for the responders in their community. We have a path that is being followed towards broadband networks, LTE, for public safety communications around the world. If the networks do not penetrate into all buildings, our responders will be in jeopardy. Wi-Fi may be a very important option, and the national network operators must investigate this. Regulators as well, for the calling public, need to assure that the public can call for help 112, 911, 000, 999, wherever they are. So, Bruno, let's talk with the colleagues in industry and find out what's being done.
Absolutely, Ken. I think you just outlined how the operational and market context is so important before we deep dive on any technology. And I think you also start to drive our audience towards the in-building problem that we need to solve. And on that note, I would like now to move on here on the agenda and present an initial framework and direction arising from the WBA working groups. And for that, I will invite Mark Grayson, work group chair of this topic, together with fellow colleagues. So Mark, let me hand over to you.
Fantastic. Bruno, can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. Yeah, so thanks, Ken. What a great introduction. And candidly, the CISRIC 8 Working Group 4 that you just described and their report to the FCC on the role of Wi-Fi was the inspiration of much of this work, which got triggered in WBA. So my name is Mark Grayson. I'm a fellow at Cisco, but I'm deeply involved with Wireless Broadband Alliance on many of their programs, and wanting to share today work that's been going on in the Alliance around the general topic of mission critical communications over Wi-Fi. Okay, so why mission critical services over Wi-Fi? I think Ken described it very well. You know, Wi-Fi is the de facto standard for in-building connectivity, and often is the only available access. As Ken says, our buildings are getting more thermally efficient. When they become more thermally efficient, they block the outside radiation getting in and the inside radiation getting out. Hard to serve from the macro network, better to serve using indoors. We see that from an industry perspective, IMT 2030, which came out of the ITU, laying out the requirements for 6G, is the first time an industry really calls out a requirement for serving deep in-building service and continuity as we move in and out of buildings. And so we're maybe concerned that people will use this to justify more cellular deployments. We're seeing some operators push back about saying, well, if there's Wi-Fi, let's leverage the Wi-Fi before we justify more in-building cellular deployments. We can talk about national regulations. All of these mission critical services are national regulations. There are no international regulations, but we have the International Fire Code, the National Fire Prevention Association, all requiring in-building coverage. And we know those legacy systems, those P25 systems, those Tetra systems, are in the midst of a complex transition from legacy towards 3GPP. And we really want to demonstrate Wi-Fi's future and readiness to support these mission critical services, specifically when that 3GPP or PMR system coverage is not available. So from a WBA perspective, we look at this in three threads, three candidly different maturity levels in terms of the status. We talk about emergency calling, so the ability to use a Wi-Fi capable device to make that emergency call 911, 112, 999 over Wi-Fi. In particular, depending on your national jurisdiction, it may require credential-less access. I'm sitting here in the UK. That's not a requirement here in the UK, but there are other areas in the world where credential-less access is a requirement. Then when the first responders visit, as Ken described, how do we grant access to those first responders for national security and emergency preparedness services during those emergency situations? And the final piece, a little bit further out, is on emergency warning systems. I think we've all experienced those emergency warning systems that get delivered over cellular cell broadcast technology. How can we, when we're deep in building, ensure that those deep in building users get access to those same emergency warning systems? And really, this is built on a foundation of secure and scalable, seamless access to the Wi-Fi network using Passpoint and/or open roaming. So we expect all users, personnel, to be seamlessly authenticated onto that network. So just going through each one of those in turn, emergency calling over Wi-Fi, the end goal, a Wi-Fi capable device outside of cellular coverage, able to make calls using the native dialer. And I think that's key, is we're not looking to supplement the cellular device. We know the standards are very clear. Those devices will always make an emergency call on the cellular network when a cellular network is available. We're talking about those situations when there is no cellular coverage available to the user. And so we need the device to seamlessly and securely authenticate onto the wireless network. We need to route that call to the correct public safety answering point. And then when it gets to the PSAP, we obviously need to be able to determine a dispatchable location for that call, all over that Wi-Fi coverage. From a first responder capabilities, we know historically these have been uniquely associated with cellular, the Star 272 service, the Wireless Priority Service. I think in the US, 5,500 organizations are authorized to receive WPS service. Well, the great news is in Wi-Fi 7, we're getting new certified capabilities for EPCS, Emergency Preparedness Communication Service, which integrates this capability and priority channel access into the Wi-Fi 7 standard, into the Wi-Fi access points and the Wi-Fi devices. So we're getting movement from an industry perspective there. We're obviously looking to leverage the existing national systems that authorize users. We see an industry gap to bridge between the identity providers receiving authorization and the access networks able to deliver that end-to-end service. So some of the work that WBA is driving to fill that particular gap. And the final piece is on public warning messages. I think quite timely that United Nations have a 2027 initiative ensuring everyone on Earth is protected according to emergency messages. And key is it's not just about cell broadcast. Emergency alerts are a multi-channel dissemination, over post, over radio, over cellular, and over Wi-Fi to then allow those messages to reach them over their preferred and trusted communication channels. So we think if that preferred and trusted is Wi-Fi, then we should be able to deliver those emergency alerts over Wi-Fi. Once again, calling out some gaps. We have some capability already defined in 802.11, the ability to disseminate the emergency alert over the 802.11 system. What we don't have is an end-to-end system. But the good news is that some of the work that WBA has done is to do a proof of concept, which demonstrates the ability to disseminate 500,000 cloud events for these critical alerts to be sent to Wi-Fi networks in under 2 seconds. So we think using hyperscaler type technologies, we're able to build the back end, which is able to scale the delivery of warning messages over the myriad of Wi-Fi networks we see being deployed in all of these particular locations. So key takeaways is we think Wi-Fi is now mission critical ready. We're delivering the low latency, the deterministic performance required for these types of services. The industry has transitioned from a tower-based location to device-based hybrid, which enables routing of Wi-Fi and cellular calls alike, as well as to be able to determine those dispatchable locations. Obviously, from a WBA perspective, reinforcing that seamless access using secure passpoint and open roaming to enable access to mission-critical users. And then from a WBA perspective, driving those industry standards to ensure all these end-to-end systems are available across the global footprint. So Bruno, hopefully that gives, I guess, the listeners, the panel, an appreciation of work that's been going on in WBA over the last number of quarters, and maybe tease it up for the next step in terms of the panel. Thank you.
No, absolutely, Mark, and thanks for being able to condense such valuable information, and you presented on our Congress last week. So there is an extended version, I would call it, of this presentation arising from the Congress. But definitely, you bring some important dimensions into this topic. So the identity-driven connectivity, blending existing capabilities in, for instance, Wi-Fi with Passpoint Open Roaming. So that's why we definitely need a working group to make all this work. But yeah, totally agree. I think with these two initial perspectives, we are in great shape now to move into our interactive panel. So let me invite the fellow panelists here to join us here on the stage. And for that, I will request a quick introduction from each of you, and especially why this topic is relevant based on your current day jobs and your organization. So what's really the mission of your organization regarding this topic? So let's go over the list here we had online. So let me start with Matt Bullock.
Yeah, thanks, Bruno. And thanks, Ken and Mark, for that introduction. That's fantastic. So I'm Matt Bullock. I'm a distinguished engineer at Fortinet. We're a cybersecurity company. That's really what we're known for. But specifically, I work in the area of operational technology, rugged networks, emergency communications, anything that goes bump in the night and is not your typical enterprise network. So I've been working with the WBA and with our Wi-Fi solution for quite some time now. I've recently started working in some of the emergency services areas that we support and directly with a lot of our customers, especially in the US, but generally globally as well. So we're keenly interested in this and in providing secure connectivity and making sure that theme of security is kind of inherent in all of the things that we're doing with emergency service providers.
No, thanks, Matt. And I know you have some nice use case and let's call it toys to show very soon. So let's go back to that in a moment. Then we have Eric Tongens, board member at SBC. Eric.
Yeah, good morning. So my name's Eric Tenges, and I work for Graybar. And Graybar is a distributor of electrical, data, and communications infrastructure. And I specifically manage our wireless business. That's this topic. But as you mentioned, I also work with the Safer Buildings Coalition as a longtime board member. I'm former president of the board as well. And I've also helped create a special focus area around school safety as we've created a school safety work group, probably for some fairly obvious reasons that we're focusing there, but really it's a very vulnerable population that has far too often been targeted, but also, really a large number of just day-to-day events that require emergency communication. So we've created a special focus around that. If you look at the Safer Buildings Coalition, our mission overall is solving for in-building dead zones for all types of communications. So whether it's land mobile radio that the first responders are utilizing, commercial cellular service that people are using to call 911, it can also involve private cellular networks. There's just obviously a lot of discussion here about Wi-Fi as that's come into to play as well. So we want to make sure that that works. We also want to ensure that we get not just a dispatchable location, but an actual location of someone. So not just an address for a building, but you imagine you're responding to a high-rise building. I need to know which floor you're on or what area of that floor you're on in order to be able to respond effectively and quickly. But we've also started looking at school safety technologies, in particular for wireless panic alerts, so that we can get responders dispatched to the location as quickly as possible. But if you look at fundamentally, our belief is that your ability to dial 911 and be accurately located from a mobile device should not depend on where you happen to be standing at that point in time, which really brings us to that in-building environment that I know we'll talk about a lot more as we go through today.
No, thanks, Eric. And I think you bring another very key dimension, which is location and how then we blend with existing systems. So we'll go back to that in a moment. And next we have Howard Buzik from American Bandwidth, a member of the WBA, very vested on this topic. Howard, over to you.
Absolutely, yes. So I'm Howard Buzik, and I'm from American Bandwidth. We specialize in providing indoor coverage using Wi-Fi networks. Specifically, we partner with all three Tier 1 carriers to have their SIM cards authenticate onto Wi-Fi networks automatically when they come inside the building. Along those lines, we've actually also started to prioritize FirstNet devices specifically on the Wi-Fi networks once they connect by putting those users in a protected VLAN so that in an emergency condition, their service is not degraded. But there's other things that were mentioned by Mark. There's an NSEP feature where we would be able to theoretically prioritize first responders before they connect. So there's no contention for that authentication onto that network. So we're spending a lot of time on trying to get indoor coverage solved. We focus a lot on school districts in particular, because that's a key area where public safety is a concern. And the good news is most schools, thanks to E-rate funding over the last several years, mostly have really high quality enterprise grade networks already deployed. So we're trying to take that indoor infrastructure and use it to support critical communications and public safety. Also along those lines, we're doing some end-to-end testing with 802.11 and indoor location capability that comes with Wi-Fi, where each phone essentially treats every access point like it's an indoor GPS satellite for that location that Eric just mentioned, where we can say within a meter or so where you are, including what floor you're on, And even if you're making a circuit switch call to 911, that data does get through to the 911 call center. Although we're just validating that's working correctly and what handsets are supporting that correctly, but we're really focused on that sort of work. So that's a summary of what we do.
Yeah, that's a great summary, Edward, Howard. And it's also a notion on over-the-top and fast solutions that can be applied. And then with your secret sauce and adding some standards on top, you really build something that can solve many of the issues that some of those school districts have today. So thanks for joining and sharing that perspective. Next, we have Stephen Devine representing APCO International, one of the largest organizations in the world focusing on this topic. So, Stephen, would you mind presenting yourself and the organization?
Thank you, Bruno. It's a great opportunity. Thank you for allowing me to represent APCO on this important topic. APCO is the world's largest and oldest public safety communications organization. We have an international reach to a number of continents, specifically advocating public safety communications. And we advocate both sides. We see the 911 and the public's ability to dial 911 and the need for location accuracy. And those calls are not just voice anymore. Those calls are going to include video and multimedia. Next generation 911 is coming. So we're seeing that already to some degree where the caller is sharing more than just its voice. So location accuracy is critical. And the integration of broadband in a building, enhanced broadband coverage not only improves first responders' broadband capabilities, but also the ability of the citizenry to dial 911 and to get the assistance that they need. We're also seeing as a part of this, APCO also advocates for the transition to public safety broadband, and we're not leaving LMR, it's in addition to. We're seeing now LMR devices that have LTE capabilities in them, they have Wi-Fi capabilities in them, so we're really seeing the opportunity for our first responders to have a deeper toolbox with a number of connectivity options before them, and the devices are agile enough to navigate across those opportunities. So in the end, the first responder may have 4 or 5 or 6 different connectivity options. They may all have their own imperfections, but there's a degree of resilience and redundancy in that effect. So we really see it's a better experience for the responder to see Wi-Fi as an in-building capability. And I think education is an important piece. I think this webinar, as well as future efforts, really need to highlight the education that there are other connectivity options out there. These technologies continue to evolve. And the good news is the devices that we're using today and tomorrow can leverage those solutions. So we're excited to be here, and thank you.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and definitely the education point you brought will be quite substantial here throughout our discussion. So, yeah, Thank you so much. And last but not least, we have Tiro from TCCA, which I believe helps bridging also here both worlds. So, Tiro, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Tero Pesonen, and I'm the board vice chair at TCCA and the chair of Critical Communications Broadband Group. Well, for those of us that know what GSMA is, we could say that TCCA is the GSMA for critical communications sector, comprising starting from defense, public safety, police, fire, ambulance, and so on, critical infra, transport, resource industries, oil, gas, and mining, all of those users and user communities where if the connection doesn't work, then something bad happens, either to people or to environment or to property. So we are the representative of this sector in 3GPP as a market representation partner and driving the global solutions, truly global solutions for critical communication, recognizing now, bringing the bridge you, Bruno, asked for to this session, recognizing that connection is the lifeline. That's the starting point. Without connection, there isn't anything. And in that sense, standardized solutions globally, common solutions globally, enabling the connection to take place and enabling those critical communications users, first responders to communicate is absolutely essential. And we are seeing this is, of course, the same for enterprises and for citizens. So the more the merrier. So happy to be here. Thank you.
No, perfect. Thank you, Taro. And I think on that note, and now that we have a perspective on the background and the mission of all the stakeholders here joining us today, the way we envisioned this interactive discussion was also if we were to scope a project to take us from here into the next stages, what should we be discussing and how we form that scope. So basically, the discussion today will help kind of framing what problem we are really trying to solve, how we move from concept state of the art to some operational reality. If we think about technology, what's the state of the art that could basically be part of a pilot? How we engage the ecosystem and we align the value chain. So we are here in this room, but we need others to join. And eventually, if we were to evaluate the success of the initiatives, we'll start in, let's say, 12 months' time, what we wanted to really access as KPIs outcomes. So for that, I would really like to start with the problem. So this is not a new topic. Like many of you mentioned, and over time we saw regulation, we saw consultations from various countries trying to address the problem from time to time, either, I don't know, during summertime. For instance, here in my region in Europe, these kind of critical communication systems are put into lots of pressure. Sometimes they even, can fail. So I would like just to go again around the table and ask you, so regarding the real operational challenge, could you nominate, your top item that you would like to add to this potential project scope going forward? And I'll just mention a comment we received here on the chat that one colleague is mentioning, guys, maybe you already have solutions. So we should probably focus on, if I have in building coverage or a radio technology that works today, please don't implement a new one that will reduce our coverage. So this is really contrary to new technology, but I think is a good analogy on some of the thought process we might have to take here for our discussion. But yeah, so problem and top problem, real operational problem. Let's go around the table. Not sure, maybe Mark, I know you had some data points. Let's start with you.
Yeah, I'm going to start with scale, Bruno. So I think we recognize that we have a scaling problem as we look to do in building, and we've got a, I guess, good experience from a WBA perspective around how we addressed scale from a public Wi-Fi perspective. So I know, appreciating this is a new community, and you might not be familiar with some of the programs that WBA has been driving, but how do we scale the adoption of public Wi-Fi? Because in the past that was hampered by mobile operator legal teams not scaling to the amount of real estate they need to cover. And we conceived of a solution called open roaming, which is all about scaling that particular use case. If we look at this use case, we need to scale the fire marshal who's going around and gridding out those floor areas and ensuring that we've got good radio coverage. And that's not just on the larger buildings. So if we look at the mix of buildings from a US perspective, 5.5 million commercial buildings in the US, but 94% of those are below 50,000 square foot. So how do we scale? Yes, we can scale up. And conventionally, I guess, from an indoor cellular perspective, we've been focusing on the 25,000 square foot and above, where there's significant footfall to drive the economics of indoor cellular. But we've got to recognize that 95% of the market is below the threshold, which conventionally has triggered cellular investment. And I don't know whether that applies equally to the BDAs that Ken was showing in terms of their particular focus. So I think my key challenge is how do we scale this business, not just to the very large buildings, but across all the footprint.
Interesting, and definitely, I think legal is something we want to discuss more in the next round. But that's a great point, and capex, right? So for smaller footprint. Thanks, Mark. I see, Stephen, we'll have you next, and you have 45,000 plus members. So how do you approach the problem statements here?
And yeah, I think to Mark's point, as a follow-on, I think defining the opportunity. at the local level. Let the local fire department, the local police department being aware of the Wi-Fi presence in their jurisdiction, in those buildings, in those capability, in those larger facilities, in medium-sized buildings, in commercial buildings, and what their access could be or should be to that. I think education and promoting awareness that there's another connectivity option out there for you if you're willing to provide the sweat equity to go out and identify it. And they also need to be equipped with the mechanisms to identify how they access it when they do find it. But for a 911 authority or for a fire marshal's office to understand the coverage, the Wi-Fi capabilities in their jurisdiction is a huge tool and an empowering one.
Very interesting, very interesting. And I think that's when we start to, come up with this set of actions where we need to work together as industry players and maybe ours. When you are on the field and you hear, some of the problems of these IT directors, CIOs of school districts, do they raise this problem once you propose your solution? Is that the key, selling point from your perspective?
Well, I mean, the key selling point, if you want to call it a selling point, is that to Mark's, if you're just deploying a cellular solution, you have to literally deploy new equipment in order to make it work. And, most buildings, and certainly pretty much every school building in the world that, at least in the developed world, has a deployed Wi-Fi network already. So I guess what it comes down to is the CapEx problem almost completely goes away if you can find a way to use that existing Wi-Fi network. I think that, but as we've been deploying this and realizing it's useful for critical communications, there still are gaps, right? Wi-Fi in a school is deployed in classrooms and in the administrative offices, but not in stairwells or in parking garages and things like that. So I believe that there's still an opportunity to densify and harden Wi-Fi networks for this purpose. And to Stephen's point, we should find ways to help first responders connect automatically to these networks, even if they don't have a cellular device that has the right SIM card in it. And those are areas we're trying to investigate and try to come up with better solutions for.
Interesting, interesting. And maybe on that note, Howard, I was just going to maybe poke, Matt here, and I know you are going to talk about some of your nice solutions, but there's a problem, and you talk closely with customers that buy other type of gear. Where do you see kind of the main requests coming from, and what problems they are trying to solve?
Yeah, it's interesting, Bruno, because as a Fortinet employee, I'm contractually obligated to say that my number one requirement is security and security of the infrastructure, and that is to some extent true. In critical communication and emergency communication, security is important. But I would argue in most situations, if you're in an emergency response situation, it's probably not your first concern. Your first concern is probably going to be availability, and the two do really play hand in hand. With that security, the security of access, the availability is kind of front and center. And that's historically not something that most public Wi-Fi and enterprise Wi-Fi even is really known for, is that availability, that ease of access. Basically, a first responder, if Ken walks into a building, he's on a call, he needs to work. His communication needs to work. There doesn't need to be any dials to change into talk around mode or to change over to Wi-Fi. It just needs to work. And I think that is what we're seeing more than anything. I mean, security is something that when you get up to the purchase decision, when you're ticking the box on that is a requirement that needs to be there for everything. But when the rubber meets the road, when you have a first responder, when you have an emergency situation in your building or in your location, the availability, the simplicity as it works. And I think as we start to work through some of these Wi-Fi standards, as this working group gets a little more road under its tires, we'll start to see some of that work really play out because that availability, the ubiquitousness of these Wi-Fi infrastructure, with the availability, with the reliability kind of peppered in, I think that's really what we're going to need. That's what we're hearing from customers that we're going to need for critical communication. Right now, there's little incentive for a public school or for a municipality or for just a normal enterprise to provide this level of access, this level of guarantee. We have to be able to provide that for them. We have to have a tangible benefit to them that says, okay, well, with this additional buy into the game, basically, you're going to be able to have this better response time if there is a fire in your building, if there is, a bad actor on premises, you will have that ability to provide a better experience, a faster response time for those first responders. So I think those are all facets that we hear from customers. When we talk to public sector customers, they get it. When we talk to first responders and emergency providers, they get it instantly. They're not the ones that we have a hard time convincing of the need for something like this. It's when we go talk to the K through 12 school that's already strapped for budget. It's when we go to talk to, the enterprise customer that may have a very large campus with large buildings, with skyscrapers that, they need to provide this level of connectivity. It's in their interest to do that, but they don't see that as a bottom line, as a budget for this quarter that really has an immediate payoff. So I think that's the gap that we as an industry, as industry providers, really have to cover that, to leap across that gap from the standards bodies to the implementation to the, okay, this makes sense. This is worth me spending some of my budget on this quarter to enable.
Got it. Yeah, and Matt, I think 2 points you highlighted are really key. So sometimes they already bought, Fortinet equipment, and you thrive on the security angles, and some over-the-top upgrades can facilitate onboarding, and you just certified for open roaming as well as a company, and you are building more products around that, concept. So glad to hear that's the direction you are taking. And I take that maybe firewall concept for you might be twofold. So actually, delivering, firewalls and adding the security services layer. No, thanks for that perspective. Maybe Tiro, ubiquitous connectivity, IMT 2020 and evolution. I saw you presenting once at the 6G workshop and kind of bringing those requirements into that audience. Can you share a bit more on the problems you still see from last year's 6G workshop and how these conversions can work from your standpoint?
Absolutely. I mean, maybe the word that defines it all is trust. And trust obviously means a whole lot of things that which have been already addressed here, like the availability, simplicity, security, scale, opportunity, and from a first responder point of view or a critical communications user point of view, they need to be able to know fundamentally in advance that whether something works or it doesn't work. Otherwise, it's just basically a best effort service. And obviously on the global scale and so on, standardization helps a lot. The processes help enormously, which proves that, look, there is a way to know if a signal or a service is offered, whether it's good quality, whether you can trust it, and so on and so on. So that's one, the global piece. Then we have a national and regional and local piece on regulation and deployment related questions. And then indeed the third part, which is most important, is really for the users themselves to find out that how do we work under different circumstances. Fundamentally, from a user perspective, they shouldn't need to work any differently, regardless of the connectivity. In particular, when you are stressed, you are tired, you are afraid, exhausted, and all of those things, and then there's heat and water coming over you. That's not the best moment to think that, okay, how do I use this particular connectivity versus something else? It should be the same which you use every day. And I suppose once we are able to prove, probably first locally and maybe a building basis, and then a region and a city, and then maybe even on a global scale, how to do this in a trustworthy way, then we have really achieved the goal. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think a real practical perspective you bring to standard bodies and presenting, like you mentioned, we used to also have that practical approach. So let's build on that for sure. Stephen, I think you have a quick follow-on. please.
I do. Just a quick one to Matt's follow up on Matt's. Matt indicated that first responders just want the devices to work. It's important to note too that they're not as concerned as to how it works. So there's some empowering capabilities for people like us in the way that we allow those things to develop and interface with each other. I can envision a future where a responder has the ability to decide which connectivity solution is going to work best for them. This one first, then this one, then this one, then this one, and to be able to build profiles within the interfaces of devices in order to do so for this particular scenario or that particular scenario, where they can manage the opportunistic capabilities of the device itself. So they're less concerned about how it works, they just want it to work.
Yeah, that's a great point, Stephen. And we've seen analogs to this in the enterprise world with things like SD-WAN, really taking off across the industry on the enterprise side of things, where as an end user, as even an enterprise customer, I don't really care how the data is getting out. I don't really care how I'm connecting to the remote site. I just know that I am. And the network itself is taking care to make sure that my applications are getting the most appropriate treatment, that they're getting the most cost-effective treatment in some instances. And we as administrators can set what we consider the bounds for that, what we consider in this scenario, what we consider the appropriate voice quality, what we consider the appropriate roaming agreements. That all takes place under the hood, but you're 100% right. The end user doesn't care how this works. They just need it to work.
Yeah, exactly. So, and any connectivity is better than no connectivity in this, use case. And maybe on that note, I would probably ask you, Eric, as SBC, you have been trying to put a very practical approach into your work, and I'm seeing here, a problem being raised around. And I don't want this to scale here on our discussion, but in terms of this, let's say, encouragement we need from authorities and guidelines for buildings, IT managers, have you had some type of work on that front? Any perspectives there?
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I think we've said it in a variety of different ways, but I want everybody to understand that fundamentally, when we can't communicate, and particularly in an emergency, we're less safe. There are countless examples. If you look at any kind of large scale events, you look at after action reports, you'll almost always find in there some kind of communication failure that helped to make the situation worse than it should have otherwise been. And there's been lots of loss of life and other negative impacts that have happened over communication failures. You also got to realize that while there's a lot of focus on response, and there certainly should be, that nobody's coming to respond until you call 911 or hit a panic alarm or whatever that way is of notifying them that there's an issue. So, at Safer Buildings, historically, we've tried to attack this through codes, code development, and encouraging code enforcement. We have a very aggressive seminar schedule where we're out there providing training to the local authorities, as well as the industry and radio operators, and trying to bring them all together to discuss all of these issues to try to solve for it. But the reality is that enforcement of those codes, while it is gaining every day, it is very scattered. It's different everywhere you go. And it is primarily aimed at the land mobile radio and making that work, which is great. But we really believe today that an all of the above strategy is what's needed because, the enforcement's scattered. So if we don't make multiple different types of networks function in a critical communications way, then we are missing a large percentage. One of the other panelists mentioned the large number of commercial buildings, how many of them are smaller. So a lot of that code enforcement is aimed at buildings probably 50,000 square feet and above, but there's a large volume of them that fall below that. We try to attack it with cellular access, but even that, if you look at what we've accomplished, and I think we've accomplished a lot, really, as a group, but it's still a small scratch on the surface of the number of buildings out there that really have coverage problems, communication issues that are going to rear their ugly head at some point in time. And so the more technologies that we can employ to try to solve for this, and I think Wi-Fi is an important part of that equation, the better chance that we have that we can communicate in an emergency when we really need to.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, thanks, Eric. So I think with your perspective, we kind of framed here our problem around the need for, converged wireless architectures. There are some public safety operational realities that we need to work on top. I like the statement, connectivity must simply work, that some of you mentioned, and definitely we need this multi-technology resilience versus a single network dependency. And like you said, Eric, Wi-Fi as a complementary capability. So maybe at this stage, I think we got a good notion of the problem we are trying to solve with these different programs. So now maybe it's a good timing for us to move here from concept to operational reality. So I think we all went through this technology transfer cycle where sometimes we have nice frameworks, we believe we can really go to the field and do POCs, but then we find a few hurdles. So let's maybe delve now into, okay, what's already deployable today? And you already mentioned a good example. So maybe tell us also about what worked and what did not. And I think that will help us navigate here the real world deployment barriers, hopefully with more operational simplicity and automation. So with no specific order, but maybe Matt, I wanted to pick on you for this one. It's a use case, but also a nice product that you recently promoted. I know you have some boxes to show. Can you talk us more about that use case and the boxes that you have with you?
Yeah, as you said, Bruno, you bring the engineer, and I always get to bring toys, get to bring fun things to play with. And just to correct you a little bit, this is not entirely a product that we came up with. This is actually something that we worked with several of our customers and even some of our partners to build something that was being requested by a lot of our public safety customers. And this isn't actually a new concept. This is an idea that has really been around since I've been in the industry, about 30 years. So for at least 25 of those years, we have had public safety organizations, we've had emergency responders interested in survivable communication, whether it's in a building, which is really exciting, the stuff that the WBA is working on there, that convergence of Wi-Fi with that. But also, just more importantly, how do I get emergency communications, critical communications when disasters happen, when you have a failure of infrastructure of whatever level that happens to be. So what we've seen over the years is that first responders, emergency responders tend to collect around an idea of some sort of a man-portable, a portable kit. Firefighters might bring it in. There might be police, first responders, emergency services, FEMA, that bring in some sort of a kit that provides emergency connectivity, provides a Wi-Fi hotspot essentially with open roaming there so that all of the different agencies responsible for that response can actually participate. They can have network connectivity. They can share information. We saw it here in North Carolina where we had the hurricanes, where we've been trying to, cobble together agencies and organizations. So it's a big push from the state of North Carolina for that. We've had various other states that are interested in similar types of things. So these use cases really converged around a couple of different categories. The first was, when you have a disaster, when you have an outage, when you have an emergency situation, and your normal infrastructure is down. You may have a loss of power, you may have a general widespread outage, but all of your infrastructure isn't completely down. And so that's where, the marriage of an LTE or a 5G backhaul with Wi-Fi, really steals the scene there, because it provides that connectivity through Wi-Fi with open roaming and that backhaul with LTE. So that results in something like this. And this is something that we did with some of our partners, Parsec Technologies in Texas, who build fantastic antennas for first responders, for vehicles, for emergency services. They've actually begun building antenna cases. So this is a rotomolded case that they build with Wi-Fi antennas built into the lid, and actually turn it around, 5G antennas built into the lid and Wi-Fi antennas built into the case itself. So they built all of their elements in there, include a battery support. So this thing can run for about 8 to 10 hours on a single battery with one of our gateway devices. These are 4G extenders in our case, but lots of companies make these, where you get 5G LTE backhaul with Wi-Fi hotspot locally. Nice, small, easily portable. As I said, battery powered or mains powered, depending on the level of survivability or the level of emergency that you have. It's something that you can, really quickly take to the scene, get that communication, provide a hotspot for first responders, for emergency responders there locally. The other situation that we run into, or the other category that we've heard from customers is, what do you do if everything is out? We've lost power, the 5G towers are out. We're in the middle of nowhere, we're in a disaster area, or maybe we're just in an area that just doesn't have coverage to begin with. What do we do then? And that's when this bigger case kind of comes into play. And this is, again, it's airline portable. It's a rollaboard, has wheels, nice and light. I say that's about 70 pounds, because this has the same thing that I mentioned on the smaller case. It has 5G radios, 5G antennas built into the sides of the lid. Actually has two 5G radios, so you can have two carriers active simultaneously. And everything I said about that SD-WAN coverage before, about being able to pick and choose automatically what WAN circuit you're using to get that secure communication out. It has both of that. It has a Wi-Fi 7 access point in this case with open roaming inside of the case, and it actually has a full-blown firewall inside of here. So this is really the most secure connectivity that we can put together, because it is a full firewall. It is battery powered, but then kind of the icing on top is inside of the cover is a Starlink mini dish up here in the top. So really, no matter where you happen to be, if you have a clear view of the sky, if you can see a satellite, you can get connectivity with this. Battery powered as well, can be powered with a generator, can connect to the local infrastructure. If you do have a building with some power there, but no WAN circuitry, we can provide that as well. So again, this is not something that's really unique to us. And this is not even something that's really directly a product of ours, even though we do sell it as our emergency connectivity kit. This is really something that we came to with several public sector customers in the U.S. specifically, dealing with our sales teams and with our engineering team. We said, yeah, we can work with that. We've got a good relationship with Parsec. We've been working with them for years on the antenna side. So together we can do all of this. So just proposing this is just more of a general idea of what we're hearing from customers and what we're seeing as what's possible with the state of the art. Ignore the Fortinet logo on the top, because this could really be anyone's equipment inside of here. But this is something that, we're seeing this need for robust, secure, quick communication, quick connectivity with Wi-Fi. It's kind of the ubiquitous connectivity mechanism in the general area. So whether you have, an emergency response headquarters, or you have a mission critical control center, I've actually seen this deployed in pop-up polling locations. So, boards of elections will deploy something like this in those scenarios, just to give you brief connectivity in that pop-up location. So, these types of things are fairly ubiquitous, and we really do see a lot of this secure connectivity, a lot of this secure communication, emergency mission critical communication over Wi-Fi, really rolling into these sort of deployable kits as we move forward, and really blurring that line between the work that the WBA is doing, having a direct application into a lot of what these mission critical kits are being rolled out by first responders.
Perfect. No, Matt, yeah, thanks for bundling all these different concepts and clarifying this challenge of not being a product. Much appreciated, and inviting for collaboration. So really appreciate the overview. And on that note, I think Ken would be a perfect moment. When we met back in Barcelona, you told me about a very practical use case of people being stuck outside the building with no connectivity, bringing cars and lots of logistics. So concept to reality, is this one example of, way forward you see?
I think it's a critical progress point that we've met. When I was at the British APCO meetings in March, I asked Motorola Solutions, who is a major supplier of push-to-talk equipment for the emergency services, about their ability to support an open roaming type of capability. And indeed, they already have that capability in some of those devices that are being used. In the UK in particular, the National Health Service has decided to apply their enterprise Wi-Fi with these capabilities, so that security staff in the National Health Service, they register once with this roaming capability, and they can move from facility to facility without having to reestablish connectivity to the network. I'm encouraged by how much progress has been made. I'm a little more worried about the ability of citizens to take advantage of this for dialing in to a 911, 112 type of network. And I'm curious. Maybe Howard could address this. What is the gap that has to be addressed if you have multiple network operators and some support the capability, but others do not, how do the citizens who come in on a network operator that doesn't support this get access to 911?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So the good news, I think Mark mentioned this, 911 calling itself in most cases is almost all cases going to happen over circuit switch calling. So 800 megahertz spectrum is going to get inside that building and they can do it regardless. But still, just standard communications, being able to call non-911 numbers is a challenge. I think we're lucky in that in the US market, all three tier one carriers plus a number of the smaller MVNOs have all adopted this passpoint slash open roaming standard, which is great. But yeah, when it comes to markets outside of the US, I think that more work needs to be done to either encourage those operators to try out the standard, or I think more appropriately, we need to work with folks like Motorola and others that provide the solutions to first responders, at least, to help them have profiles pre-installed in the devices they carry and get them connected in all locations. So that may be an easier solution to come up with. At the European market alone has 27 countries and 3 or 4 carriers per you need to twist the arms of. So working with the folks to provide public safety equipment is probably a great starting point to spread this solution more broadly.
Yeah, and for this type of use case, I know you have kind of an estimation on how much time you need to bring a school with, let's say, if there's a cellular outage, if you bring this over-the-top Wi-Fi mechanism, it's quite a fast process, right?
Well, the equipment's already there, so in many cases we can, assess the quality of that network before doing it. So we're looking at the heat maps of a site walk, if you will, for the Wi-Fi network. But once that's done and we've validated it, we can implement the solution in less than 1 hour.
Perfect. Yes, that's quite impressive. Yeah. So let me just move here to Mark. Mark, you mentioned something really fundamental about the problem and state of the art when you, for instance, talked about the public warning system and scaling this. So yeah, would you mind just sharing some of the thoughts and the process that went into enabling that?
Oh wow! I was gonna just close on emergency calls, but yeah, if we want to transition to warning messages, yeah, I mean, so clearly, warning messages. The focus of the United Nations initiative is on the cellular version, so the cell broadcast, where you've got to take an emergency alert message and squeeze it into 90 characters to try and get it broadcast. There is an equivalent in Wi-Fi, but the problem we see is how do we scale to Wi-Fi? Different from the building scale, but how do we scale to the number of Wi-Fi networks? And then just a data point on open roaming. Open roaming as a federation, I think every day we see hundreds of new networks appear in the Open Roaming Federation to give you an appreciation about how many networks join. And so how do we scale the distribution of warning messages to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Wi-Fi networks? Clearly that problem doesn't exist in cellular. If I'm a federal authority, I have IPsec connections with a handful of cellular operators who voluntarily agree to deliver those warning messages. And so it scales to a low integer number of mobile operators. Imagining now we've got 100,000 open roaming Wi-Fi access networks in the US and how we would then distribute that type of warning message. So we think a different structure is required in order to be able to scale that. But as we pointed out, we've got a proof of concept using, I guess, hyperscaler technologies, which is able to, with off-the-shelf hyperscaler capability, deliver 500,000 warning messages in under 2 seconds. And why we think that's important is because we're talking about in-building. I think in particular, if you're looking at earthquake warnings, and we're talking with some of our colleagues based in Turkey, they've had near-term experience about the issue about getting those warning messages to in-building users. So the ability to be able to use Wi-Fi to specifically target warning message dissemination to in-building users, I think people recognize there's real value there. And so the work that we need to do from an industry perspective, we need to accelerate that capability onto the set of Wi-Fi devices, because unlike on first responders, when I may be using my Motorola AXC device and I can get sort of LTE and Wi-Fi capabilities on my Motorola specific, terminal. If we're looking at warning messages to the public, we need to ensure that all of those public devices get that capability. So we've got how do we drive that certification and availability, and how do we mix that with the distribution of warning messages? But we think that there is clearly merit, there's clearly a need, and we're sort of, calling out for the industry to come together to try and drive this solution forward.
Yeah, no, thanks, Mark. And definitely a very practical angle is the POCs we enable alongside our events. And we always have this open roaming live network. So I believe is a real good live test bed to come and just put those solutions into play. Thanks, Mark. I think, Stephen, you had a follow-on, and we are seeing some questions coming through the chat. I think this was one after you also shared a few thoughts on code enforcement. So we have our colleague Luther Smith from Cable Labs asking, who does the enforcement? Is it building codes or fire codes? Not sure if you could answer to this, or anyone here on the panel.
Is the authority having jurisdiction? I guess you just call them AHJ and they have the jurisdiction.
Got it.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah, it's who has the jurisdiction. And the other, Bruno, the other question, I think it was in response to my in a so-called hybrid usage in an RF challenging environment. How well does the real world transition between networks work? And then what happens if something gets stuck on perhaps a poorer quality connection? Remember, we're looking at additional connectivity methods here. So if the alternative is nothing, then yeah, I would imagine at onset initially, there's probably going to be some adjustments and ways that these devices migrate across these networks efficiently and effectively. But I'd like to think that it's certainly better than the alternative. It's going to get better. All of these things, when you go back in your house, your device moves over to your Wi-Fi network. And so there's already a transition. Hopefully there's a way for first responders and to manage the way that their devices navigate across those networks. But I would like to think that it will start off perhaps a bit cumbersome, but get better quickly given the nature of the technology. And with regard to 911 in the US, regardless of which carrier you dial 911, if there's no coverage in that, then any of the carriers are required to transport that call. So that's another architecture that perhaps is something we can leverage with regard to looking at these other connectivity models.
Yeah. No, thanks, Stephen. And I think you just put it really bluntly that we even need to solve this problem for, Wi-Fi calling. So people don't want to have a call drop moving between networks. So this is even scaling it to a much more, relevant scale, I would say. Howard, do you have a quick follow-on?
If I jump ahead of you, Mark, if that's okay, because I think you had a hand up first. But I just wanted to speak to Stephen that honestly, there's things that you can do today to assure good transitions already. So you might notice if you're doing a Wi-Fi call at home and you're walking out to your car and that the call doesn't drop, but it gets quiet for a second or two. That often happens because your consumer grade Wi-Fi networks using 2.4 gigahertz channels, and it kind of steers down to those channels and holds on as you leave the house. Enterprise grade networks allow you to only broadcast in 5 gigahertz and 6 gigahertz, which is spectrum that does not penetrate walls, and it can help to assure a good transition from Wi-Fi to cellular as you leave a building. And there's other features in lots of enterprise grade networks where you can require a minimum RSSI, signal strength to stay connected on this perimeter APs as well. So there's a lot of things that you can do and that we do in our services to really have a smooth handover, so it's not clunky going between Wi-Fi and cellular networks.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And Ken Reben highlighted the e-glass challenge of RF being able to penetrate. What happens is if that's the case for in-building, then that same e-glass provides us the opportunity to bounce that 5 and 6 gig signal off of, so we use it to our benefit rather than to our detriment in the old models.
Yeah, the philosophy is that Wi-Fi is for indoors and cellular is for outdoors, and it's a really great dividing wall for lots of reasons.
Perfect. Mark, over to you.
Yeah, so just really on the certification of occupancy, which I guess we have that as a greater than a neg 95 as a requirement for PMR, and that's a hard requirement. Although, as Ken said, it's only for certain, maybe only just new buildings, retrofitted buildings. How do as we scale down, as we include Wi-Fi, we clearly can't rely on a very hard certification of occupancy requirement. So I think we still have a challenge about how do we incentivize adoption, and how do we cover off issues like liability, as obviously the building owner needs to enable certain aspects to offer some of these services, not emergency call, which we believe can work transparently to the building owner. But for some of these other services, clearly the building owner, the enterprise IT will need to make some configuration changes. So we need, and I think this came out with the CISRIC 8 Working Group 4, is what is the liability framework, and can we have clarity around those aspects from an FCC perspective?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Mark. And definitely also the concept of broad scripts that can scale, I think help a lot, especially when equipment is already deployed. So that will be a good one for us to include here on the scope. Eric, I see you have a follow-on.
Yeah, so look, if we're looking at the additional Wi-Fi, and again, I think approaching an all of the above strategy is fantastic, because no one network is perfect. Everything is prone to some kind of failure at some point, and so layering on Wi-Fi is fantastic. What I want to caution is that if we start to look at Wi-Fi as the primary connectivity methodology, then we need to look at our Wi-Fi networks differently. Someone earlier mentioned that Wi-Fi today is mission critical ready, and maybe it's ready, but I don't know that it's done. I think if it becomes that primary connectivity path, then we have to realize that our Wi-Fi networks are now a life safety system. And that means that we need to address single points of failure, which largely are not in most Wi-Fi networks today. So primarily power. Is that Wi-Fi network connected to backup power source, UPS or a generator, so that if there's a power failure, I don't lose all my communications? Secondly, so Howard already earlier mentioned coverage. We need to make sure that it exists in all places, because how many people have put Wi-Fi in the stairwells or in the restrooms, places of refuge, where we're going to need to communicate in an emergency. So we need to expand where we have the Wi-Fi deployed into other areas. But if our internet fails, so if I've only got one path for my internet, I've got a fiber connection to the building, that fiber is interrupted for any reason, I've lost all communication out. So I need to have a resilient path for my internet connectivity, or I've defeated the whole thing. So we need to start looking at how resilient are these Wi-Fi networks if it becomes a primary path, or one that we're really relying upon. Otherwise, we need multiple pathways.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think definitely we're starting from a conversion standpoint, complementarity, but a roadmap perspective can be something we look into. Thanks, Eric. No, I think this was really insightful in terms of what works, the paths we need to go towards these real world deployments eventually. So maybe I think this is a good time, as our audience already got the perspective on the problem we are solving, what's the state of the art, what works for Wi-Fi conversions, where do we go next? So maybe I will start kind of trying to converge your thoughts on the path forward, and I think there are maybe three angles to it. So one is ecosystem collaboration and value chain alignment. So what are the players that we need to engage? And you already shared a few examples from the vendors, the operators, public safety agencies, regulators. But if you were to choose and prioritize over the next 12 months to accelerate this mission critical convergence connectivity, where you would put your focus? And maybe I would start with Tiro, because in fact, we received also a question from Andy Goins from Cisco, that leads our policy and regulatory affairs working group, on what type of collaborations TCCA have in place. For instance, in Europe, do you work with CPT, ECC, and AN group that looks at numbering and emergency calling issues? So over to you, Tero.
Thank you very much. I mean, since we work globally and try to look also very much ahead, so the focus we are looking forward to do with you with WBA is to work on 3GPP standards, to work on the 3GPP, non-3GPP access standardization for critical communication. So far, it has been more for consumer use and offloading the carrier load and these kind of aspects. Those have been on the top of discussion, but I think it would be time to start looking it from the critical and mission critical points of view, which funnily enough would then drive trust, and the driving trust would then drive also the benefits for enterprises and society. So that's certainly certainly one area. Then in critical communication sector, we also recognize there are quite many things which are out of scope of 3GPP, but very much related. In order to facilitate this, European Union, together with European parties, have encouraged ETSI, the European Telecommunication Standards Institute, the partner of ATIS, to form a new group called Technical Committee Critical Communication Systems to address those things that are relevant, related to 3GPP, but somehow not in the 3GPP scope. So that's also a place where I would sincerely welcome people to join. And as the work plan is being formed, the immediate objective there is to enable first responders to operate cross nations, cross country, over the all European Union and Schengen countries. That makes 31 countries, plus then eventually I would hope also other countries. So I believe that that is a place to influence and look into these questions, calling in also organizations like European Emergency Number Association, ENA, and the folks in this call, and that makes the long-term path, and I'm sure the colleagues here are then more on the practical side. Thank you.
No, thanks, Tero, for sharing your perspectives, and we totally agree, right? So definitely avoiding overlaps and finding common association partner interfaces, as I call it, is really, really key. So glad to have you and sharing your perspective. Maybe next, Stephen, I would go to you. I know you have been vocal in the beginning about education and collaboration to make large-scale deployment successful. So what would be your message here to the industry and as working together?
I'm sorry, had a cough right there. No, thank you. Again, I think awareness and education, by making the AHJs aware of the fact that there is the potential for them and steps that they need to go through in order to leverage Wi-Fi capabilities as another connectivity option when they're in their responders, I think that's huge. And if there's any way that we can promote that, and I'm not saying that they're going to get every building done, but I'm saying in their communities, they're going to begin to make it a priority. And I think that's the inertia that I think that we need to start with, to make sure that they understand there's connectivity options. If they can go out and they can get on to do some of the legwork in order to advocate, and then the questions are going to come back and say, okay, what do I need to do in order to gain that access? And we need to be able to educate and have that information available. Howard's information, et cetera, and that experience. I think we need to show examples of where it's been successful and the steps that agencies and jurisdictions need to take in order to get there.
Perfect. Yep. No, thank you for that. Maybe Howard, let me just get your thoughts on how people should approach you and get this rolling. So it's a 1 hour work for the POC, right? So
yeah, I mean, we certainly do provide proof of concepts for a lot of folks at no cost. So we're happy to, people that are interested in the technology, we can demonstrate it. But the fact is, it is a lot of like SROs recommend it to schools, and the schools want to recommend it to those police departments and fire departments. So at this stage, we've already deployed about 100 school districts, about 1,000 schools, and That's growing. We're even partnering with the mobile operators that we work with, the tier one carriers, to promote the solution and help us get the word out. So we're pretty excited about the potential to help a lot of schools. I mentioned, but if we're in 1,000 schools, there's 129,000 more that we could help out. So we're excited with this challenge about how we can get people connected.
Perfect. No, thanks for pushing the industry and moving things forward. Eric, I know you have an event coming up in DC, so this is an opportunity to engage with your community, right? So
Absolutely. We have our wireless tech and policy summit coming up in Washington, D.C. It's at the Kellogg Conference Center. It's June 9th and 10th, and we'll be exploring a lot of these issues at that event. There's a whole section that's going to be committed to talking about school safety as well. So it's a great opportunity if you're in that area to or can get into that area to come and learn about what's happening. But to kind of answer your overall question here, I'm going to kind of flip it around because we've talked a lot about the public safety side of this and how do we get movement forward? How do we create greater connectivity? And I'll say that the public safety side of it is really, really important. But what can we as an industry do today, walking away from this webinar? And the answer is to flip the focus around to economic viability. We'd love to think that building owners are going to go do projects for public safety out of the goodness of their heart, but the reality is they don't like to spend money, and there's a lot of resistance to doing things like that. Even things as simple as putting sprinklers in the building to suppress a fire, they don't want to do it because it costs a lot of money. So we have to find ways that we can make these safety improvements economically viable. How do we make it an advantage to the building? Whether it's marketing the fact that it's safer or shared infrastructure. And this is where I love the conversation around Wi-Fi or commercial cellular access, because there's so many commercially viable reasons to put those networks in. So if we can leverage them for safety, but have them justified by the building owner over the commercial viability of those networks, then we hit a home run there, and we can actually get these things deployed in many more places and really improve the safety.
no, perfect. Yeah, I think that's a perfect, let's say, advertisement for folks here to attend the session. Thank you for the participation.
Please do.
Speaking of safer buildings, there's a session tomorrow in Houston as well, we should talk about as well, Eric, right?
Yeah, I'm going to be in
let's
Houston
put it on the
myself tomorrow for that.
Yeah,
As
let's put it here on
mentioned,
the
we do seminars all around the country, but yes, we do have one in Houston tomorrow. So if you're interested in the area, we'll have a great conversation all day long about this.
Perfect. Yes, and we can put here the information on the chat. Matt, so you presented a set of partners you already work with. If someone is interested in joining and collaborating, they can contact you, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, this is a specific partnership with Parsec. We're not limited to these by any means. We're kind of a secure connectivity provider, and then we work with a lot of folks. But in terms of your question about what the next steps were, for us as an industry, I think Eric, in your previous comment, I think you really hit the nail on the head and kind of get the gold star for the comment in this. I think everyone on this call, I think we all are very bought into Wi-Fi, and we all see Wi-Fi as critical infrastructure. We all think that it can solve world peace and do all great things. But I think getting enterprise customers to fall into that same mindset, to treat it as a mission critical part of their infrastructure, that's still somewhere that we have some work to do. And I think to your previous comment about making sure that the network stays up, that the WAN is reliable, that you have more than one path out of the building from the network perspective. So that maybe you have a fiber connection, you also have a backup LTE or 5G. Maybe you have a Starlink on the roof, because Wi-Fi is mission critical at this point. So I think getting that mindset across to the enterprise customers, I think that will help us as we move forward with a lot of the work that we're doing. It's a lot easier to convince someone that already believes that Wi-Fi is mission critical. They need to cover those stairwells. They need to cover the HVAC room. It's what they need to run their business, to keep to keep safe operations going. It's a lot easier to get, once you've got that mindset, to buy them into a lot of the other stuff that we're asking them to bite off.
Yes, thanks for being open to collaborate. That's great. Next, I would just, Mark, go back to your original mission statement. We have work group calls every other week. We have an event coming up in October in Vienna where we'll hope to showcase some of these. What's your thoughts about industry next steps to summarize?
Yeah, I'm going to echo lots of Stephen. I think education and advocacy. So I just got off a call with a US retailer who is deferring their open roaming deployment because they're concerned about their liability for providing a location for emergency calls to a carrier-provided service. They're just a conduit for that IPsec tunnel. So I think absolutely we need to educate about the role of Wi-Fi and where it can be useful. And two is advocacy. Look at the fantastic panel we've got here. It looks like we've got a set of stakeholders, industry panelists who are really there to advocate for the role of Wi-Fi in supporting mission critical services. So educational and advocacy, I think that those are great sort of priorities for this next phase of this work.
No, thanks, Mark. Let's carry on. And I think I would have to give the final word of this webinar to Ken Raven. I think we talked a lot about technology, but I personally believe that those that are able to make bridges are the ones that eventually help us more to make progress. And Ken, without you, we would not have been able to gather this panel here. So I really appreciate you helping us. And please let us know your industry next steps perspective.
Yeah, so it's remarkable how much progress has been made. I think the education component is key. We need to help national authorities, regulators, network operators understand capabilities available today. A nation should not wait until they've completed a transition from narrowband to broadband to look at the benefits that Wi-Fi can provide in extending coverage. Benefits can accrue immediately because even today, paramedics will go into a patient encounter with equipment that will benefit from Wi-Fi. The mechanisms of open roaming should be applied today. So education is key. Let's get the word out about the progress that has been made. Let's get the regulatory changes to protect the legal rights of the operators of buildings. It's an imperative. Let's deliver these capabilities.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ken. So I think with this, we have reached the end of our webinar. I would just like to thank everyone. I think most of the questions have been answered live, but we'll get back to all of you and circulate between the panelists here the thoughts you have shared. And I know we needed also to talk about satellite Wi-Fi resilience that was not in scope today. But I will also want to thank our partner organizations. So you already heard about the Safer Building Coalition's event coming up in DC on June 8th and the 9th. Then we'll have Critical Communications World coming up on June 16th to the 18th in London. And then we also have APCO International coming up in San Antonio on August 2nd and the 3rd. And then WBA will have its Wireless Global Congress event in Vienna on October 15 and 16. So definitely these groups will start liaising, working together. So on behalf of WBA and everyone that attended, really appreciate your time. I hope it was useful, and that let's carry on with this mission that Ken also highlighted. Thank you, everyone, and have the rest of a good week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.